You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. Today, we're going to learn how to make generalizations in English. Don't you hate it when people say things like, Americans are rude? I mean, not all Americans are rude, and people in other countries are rude too. It's simply not helpful to say something is true of a whole group of people. When it's negative like that, it feels wrong. But it can be helpful to describe a group of people as long as we're clear that it's not everyone we're talking about. We call this a generalization. For example, many of my friends work in finance. I'm making a generalization about my friends. And it doesn't have to be people. If I say, most of our online sales come from Europe, I'm generalizing about sales. Let's try making a few generalizations like this. Listen to each example, then repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
Very little of our business comes through online sales, actually.
Many of the customer concerns are about delivery times.
Most of the people I've talked to like the new website.
On the whole, our employees are pretty happy with their jobs.
Did you hear that expression, on the whole? That's a useful phrase that means in general. You're not talking about everything or everyone, just overall or mainly. Besides phrases like on the whole, you can make this type of generalization with words like most and little. Now, we don't only generalize about how much or how many. We also generalize about what happens. For example, you might say something like, the department budget is normally reviewed by our manager. That word normally tells us that it doesn't always happen, but it usually does. Let's practice some examples of generalizing about things that happen. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
Generally speaking, we see higher sales in the summer months.
Nine times out of 10, customers give us great feedback.
Normally, our new employees go through a training program.
In most cases, we finish our projects ahead of schedule.
So, besides normally, you can use expressions like in most cases and generally speaking, and the other expression we heard is 9 times out of 10. That sounds pretty exact, doesn't it? But it really just means in most cases. We don't really mean exactly 90% of the time. This leads me to talk about how often something happens. That's something we can generalize about as well. And it's very important which words you use. You want to be somewhat accurate. For example, are you late for work usually, sometimes, or rarely? These are frequency words. If you don't use a frequency word, then you are suggesting that something always or never happens, and that might not be true. Let's try some of these expressions for generalizing about how often something happens. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
People don't usually buy something on their first visit.
More often than not, we run out of paper before the end of the month.
It's pretty rare that people complain about our service.
Our staff meetings often last more than 90 minutes.
You probably already know the word often, but what do you think more often than not means? It actually just means more than 50% of the time. We also heard the adjective rare. That's made from the word rarely, meaning not often. Some other frequency words have adjective forms, such as usually, which becomes usual, but others, such as often, don't. Okay, so we've practiced some expressions for generalizing about how many, about how things happen, and how often. But how does this sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Justine and Andy. They're talking about Andy's customers and products. Let's listen.
So, where are your customers located?
Most of them are in Canada and the US.
And are they happy with your products?
Well, it's pretty rare that we get any complaints.
That's pretty simple, right? When Justine asks about the location of Andy's customers, he says that most of them are in Canada and the US. He's generalizing about how many. Then he says that it's rare that they get complaints about their products. That's generalizing about how often something happens. Makes sense, right? Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to say that most of the customers are in Canada and the US. Then say it's pretty rare to get complaints.
So, where are your customers located? And are they happy with your products?
All right, that's all for this lesson. We've learned some great ways to generalize about how many, about what happens, and about how often things happen. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here. with another 9 to 5 English lesson. Today, we're going to learn how to explain a problem in English. Much of your work probably involves solving problems, and sometimes we can't do it alone. But cooperating with someone to solve a problem means explaining it clearly. Before you explain the problem, however, you'll need to ask for help. Two really useful words in this situation are would and could. These words help you make polite requests. For example, you might say, "Could you help me?" Or, "Would you help me with this?" And we can add to these expressions to get longer, even more polite expressions. Let's practice some ways of asking for help using would and could. Listen to each example, then repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
Do you think you could give us a hand with this?
Would you mind showing me how to do this?
Could you help me with this?
I would appreciate a bit of help.
As you heard, we can build a polite sentence around would and could using questions like, "Do you think you could?" and "Would you mind?" This is much more polite than giving people direct orders, like, "Help me, please." Now, if someone agrees to help you, what do you say next? Do you start describing the problem in great detail? Or do you think it would be better to say generally what the problem is? Well, at the start, it's good to be more general. You can give a short overview of the problem to give the person a general idea of what it's about. Let's try some examples of giving a general statement about a problem. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
It looks like there's a safety issue at the factory.
We've got some problems with the website.
I can't seem to get the copier to work.
The security system isn't working properly.
Did you hear another word that has the same meaning as problem? The word is issue, as in there's a safety issue. Or you could have a technical issue, or a security issue, or a staffing issue. Also notice that a lot of problems are about whether something works. That just means whether it functions properly. Now, it's not usually enough just to know that there's a problem. If we hope to solve it, we usually need to know what happened to cause the problem or make you think there was a problem. In this case, you need to tell a little story, and you should use the past tense to describe what happened. For example, you might say, "I turned the computer on, but the screen was blank." Or you might say, "X happened when I did Y." And at this point, you should be specific and detailed about what happened. Let's try some practice with describing what happened using this approach. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
The problem started when we made changes to the home page.
So I tried to save the document to the shared folder.
The machine made a strange noise when I turned it on.
I opened the program, but I couldn't log in.
Of course, explaining a problem clearly might mean making several sentences like this to describe the situation. And with a clear understanding of the situation, hopefully, the other person will be able to help you solve it. Okay, so we've practiced lots of useful examples for talking about problems. But how do these expressions sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Christy and John. John is trying to describe a problem with his website to Christy. Let's listen.
So, what seems to be the problem?
It looks like there's an issue with the website.
Oh no, what's going on?
Well, it started when I updated the home page.
Simple enough, right? When Christy asks about the problem, John says there's an issue with the website. And when Christy asks for more detail, he explains that it started when he updated the home page. Now, it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time, we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to say, "It looks like there's an issue with the website." Then say it started when you updated the home page.
So, what seems to be the problem? Oh no, what's going on?
All right, that's all for this lesson. We've learned some great ways to ask for help, make general statements about a problem, and describe what happened. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. Today, we're going to learn how to give instructions in English. Telling people what to do isn't just something the boss does. Anytime you're helping someone with a problem, training someone, giving technical advice, or telling a colleague how to do something, you're giving instructions. Of course, it's very important to be clear when you're giving instructions. And for that reason, we sometimes explain things step by step in a sequence of instructions. This means using words like first, secondly, and thirdly. Or you might use other words like next, and at the end of your sequence, finally, or lastly. Let's practice some ways of using these words to give a sequence of instructions. Listen to each example, then repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
First, try closing the program and opening it again.
Secondly, I'd like you to complete the rest of the form.
Next, you'll have to choose a password.
Finally, don't forget to log out at the end of the session.
So, did those instructions sound like orders? I mean, do you think giving instructions means saying, do this and do that? Well, not exactly. In fact, in English, we don't like to be too direct in most situations. That's why we say, can you try closing the program, instead of close the program. Or, you'll have to choose a password, instead of just choose a password. One way to avoid being too direct in English is to use special words called modals. Modals are words such as can and need to, and could and should. Using modals is easy. You just put the modal between you and the main verb. For example, you might say, first, you need to open an account. Let's try some examples of giving instructions using modals. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
You'll need to enter your username and password to begin.
Okay, you can now open the app and create an account.
Could you try restarting your device?
You need to start by launching the program from the main menu.
Did you notice that one example came in the form of a question? That's an extra polite way of telling someone to do something. Not every modal can be used that way, however. Only can and could will work. For example, could you check if your password is correct? Is just a nice way of saying, check your password is correct. You can also combine sequences and modals to find the right balance between being clear and polite. But what if you're not sure whether you've been clear enough? What if you don't really know whether the other person has understood? Fortunately, we have lots of different ways of checking understanding. And the best way is just to ask directly, like, do you understand? You might also ask if people are clear or whether everything makes sense. These are just different ways of asking if something has been understood. Let's try some practice with checking understanding using these expressions. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
So, is everyone clear on what they have to do?
Okay, do you understand how this works now?
Does that make sense to you?
Any questions about what you need to do?
As you heard, one other way to check understanding is to ask if there are any questions. That way, you can find out exactly what people don't understand. Okay, so we've practiced some useful ways of giving instructions and checking understanding. But what do these expressions sound like in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Sean and Kim. Sean has asked for help using a machine, and Kim is giving him instructions on how to use it. Let's listen.
Could you help me with this?
Sure. First, try turning the machine on.
Okay, I did that. What's next?
Next, you can turn the dial on the front to 50.
Does that make sense? Kim begins by instructing him to turn the machine on, then to turn the dial to 50. She uses the sequence word next and the modal can. Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to say that first, Sean should turn the machine on. Then, say next and instruct him to turn the dial on the front to 50.
Could you help me with this? Okay, I did that. What's next?
All right, that's all for this lesson. We've learned some great ways to give instructions and to check understanding. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning.